So what if your education actually started before you were even conceived?
I mean, it completely upends the timeline we normally accept, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because we usually think of education as starting the day you walk into a kindergarten classroom, wearing a slightly oversized backpack.
Right, trying to figure out where your desk is.
Exactly. But this framework pushes that way, way back.
Well, today we are taking a radically different journey. Welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive. We have a really fascinating stack of sources today that challenge some of our most deeply held assumptions about how learning actually works.
Yeah, it's a profound shift in
It
perspectives.
really is. So first, we're looking at an educational vision document by Dr. Adora Nweze, which lays out a holistic, asset-based model for Black student achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Second, we've got a framework by Jimma, Maat, Dogon, Mcwilson that maps out a lifelong process of socialization. And finally, a really intricate infographic titled The 6 Schools We Control.
And our mission today is to basically take these documents and map out a total reimagining of human development.
Right.
These sources are pushing for a massive paradigm shift. They want to move the goal of education away from mere survival and behavioral compliance and towards the ultimate cultivation of a person's natural genius.
And I want to point out right away, while these sources are specifically focused on African-centered educational models, the core questions they raise about how environments shape intelligence they're profoundly relevant to you, the listener.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, how do you process complex information?
Yeah.
How is your own learning journey shaped by forces you might not have ever even noticed?
That's the perfect lens for this. Because if we want to understand how a child learns or even how we as adults function today, we have to redefine when school actually begins.
Right.
And according to Mcwilson's framework, it begins long before birth.
Okay, I have to push back right out of the gate here because the documents refer to something called a pre-womb school.
Yeah, I know it sounds intense.
Calling it a school before the student even exists almost sounds deterministic, right?
Like,
Sci-fi. It's like coding the operating system before the computer hardware is fully assembled.
that is actually a great analogy.
But does this framework leave room for individual choice? Or is it just saying we are entirely a product of our ancestors?
It's a totally fair skepticism, but the text isn't arguing for strict biological determinism. It's talking about what they call anticipatory socialization.
Anticipatory socialization.
Oh,
Fair enough.
yeah. Think about it less as a locked destiny and more as the community preparing the soil before a seed is even planted.
Oh, I see.
Right. So future mothers and fathers are being deeply shaped by family legacies and gender roles long before a child is ever conceived.
So they are learning what it means to be a parent from the culture around them. And that software is already being written by the community.
Precisely. The infographic specifically mentions the transmission of ancient concepts like Maat, which represents truth, balance, and order,
Yeah.
and the teachings of Tahotep, an ancient Egyptian philosopher who wrote some of the earliest instructions on wisdom and morality.
Right.
These aren't just historical footnotes. They are active value systems being passed down to the future parents.
And the text also uses the term "our story," which I thought was a brilliant linguistic pivot.
Yeah, that stood out to me too.
Because instead of history, which can feel like, a narrative handed down by someone else, our story centers the community's own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are hearing these empowering narratives and internalizing them as future parents.
And this abstract cultural preparation eventually transitions into the very physical reality of the womb school. And modern science actually backs this up through biological imprinting.
Right, because we know a developing fetus is highly sensitive to the mother's environment.
Exactly.
But the text goes beyond just telling a mother to take prenatal vitamins.
Far beyond. We're talking about maternal stress levels, cortisol spikes, and early exposure to sound and rhythm physically shaping the fetal brain development. The document emphasizes creating a stress-protecting bonding environment. The community is encouraged to use affirmations and specific music to actively reduce trauma before the child even enters the world.
So if we take this hand-me-down of culture from the parents and combine it with the actual biological changes happening in the womb, it completely obliterates the idea of the blank slate.
Right, it's gone.
This kid is showing up on day one already deeply enrolled in the cultural curriculum of their community.
They arrive with a incredibly robust cultural foundation, but the question then becomes, once they arrive, how does the immediate environment keep building on that foundation?
Well, according to the framework, it transitions into the next stages.
Mm.
Parents aren't just seen as caretakers keeping the kid alive. They are framed as the first master teachers.
Yeah.
And the primary subject isn't ABCs, it's emotional regulation.
Which is arguably the most critical skill a human can learn. I mean, before a child can grasp complex math, they have to know how to manage frustration when a tower of blocks falls over.
Right, exactly.
The parents provide that initial blueprint for managing emotions and building social bonds.
The documents also distinctly carve out the role of the father or male figure as a unique educational environment, which is stage 4, I think.
Yes.
It highlights male figures as the ones shaping boundaries, teaching problem solving, and providing physical and emotional safety.
And that focused parental guidance naturally broadens into the wider family ecosystem. Think about extended kinship gatherings, cousins, the council of elders.
Right.
The family acts as a real-world simulator for life skills.
A simulator is a great way to put it. You learn how to negotiate, compromise, and resolve conflicts by fighting with your siblings over a toy, right?
Absolutely. But the source also notes something really vital here. The family teaches economic resilience.
Oh, yeah. The shared resources.
Exactly. Through the family, a child learns how resources are shared, how local cooperation works, and how to weather financial stress. It's an entire web of support.
And that web expands even further into the broader community. The text talks about neighbors, Saturday academies, mentors, and what it calls excellence nights.
Yeah, it's a very active network.
They are learning STEM, reading, and history from African-centered books. This is an incredibly dense, supportive ecosystem. And what really jumped out at me is that the infographic explicitly labels all of these early environments as the schools we control.
The phrasing "we control" is the crux of the entire argument.
Right. Because here's where it gets really interesting. If a community successfully builds all this incredibly rich cultural capital, if they've surrounded a child with elders' wisdom, Saturday academies, emotional regulation, and a deep sense of their own our story, what happens?
There's going to be immense friction.
Yeah, what happens when this deeply socialized child suddenly walks through the doors of a traditional government school?
And that friction is exactly what Jimma Maat Dogon Mcwilson addresses when he outlines the transition into formal state education. It is a jarring collision.
Now, I want to pause here for a second because it's really important for us to be clear about the source material.
Sure.
These documents take a highly critical view of formal, state-run schooling. To you listening, we aren't taking a political stance or endorsing this viewpoint.
Right. We're just reporting what the texts say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our goal is simply to impartially unpack the arguments and the perspective presented by the authors.
It's a crucial distinction. We're strictly summarizing the framework's perspective here. Mcwilson labels this 7th stage of life the government indoctrination school.
Right.
According to his text, formal state education isn't actually designed to nurture an individual's unique culture or natural genius. Its primary function is conditioning compliance to maintain the state's order.
The document states that government institutions essentially tell you what to think and then test you on how well you regurgitate what they want you to know.
Yeah.
The authors argue the curriculum embeds a standardized national identity, teaching history as told by the victors.
In this view, state schools are engineered to produce citizens who are literate enough to function in society and do their jobs, but whose primary socialization is aimed at not questioning the existing structures of power. It's about integration into a common, standardized framework.
It makes me think of an agricultural metaphor.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, if the first 6 stages are about building a unique, culturally rich mosaic rooted in the community, it's like cultivating a wildly diverse rainforest. Every plant has a different purpose, growing at different speeds.
All right.
But the 7th stage, the state schooling, acts like a giant cookie cutter trying to make every piece of the mosaic fit the same shape. Or, to stick to the farm thing, it operates like a monoculture cornfield.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The system needs the crops to grow at the exact same rate so they can be harvested on schedule, which means anything that grows a little differently or requires a different kind of soil is treated as a weed.
That metaphor perfectly captures the tension. If you're a fern trying to survive in a cornfield, the farmer doesn't think, oh, a beautiful fern.
No, they definitely don't.
The farmer thinks, this plant is broken. It's failing at being corn. And that brings us directly into Dr. Adora Nwze's vision document, because she has a specific name for that farmer's mentality.
What does she call it?
She calls it Deficit thinking.
Deficit thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, explain how she defines that, because it seems central to her entire philosophy.
Deficit thinking is the harmful assumption that students who fall outside the standardized norm need to be fixed or remediated.
So it focuses on what they lack.
Exactly. It assumes the student is lacking something. If a child's cultural background or learning style doesn't fit the traditional mold, the system pathologizes them, rather than recognizing they simply operate on a different frequency of intelligence.
Which begs the question, if this cookie-cutter approach and deficit thinking are destroying natural potential, what does the ideal greenhouse look like?
Right.
How do we restructure education to actually protect and expand a child's inherent gifts?
That is where Dr. Nweze's holistic best academic practice model serves as the antidote. She shifts the entire paradigm from remediation to what she calls asset-based thinking. The non-negotiable foundation of her model is the belief that Black children already possess natural genius.
They already have it.
Yes. They have innate intelligence, rhythmic intelligence, survival intelligence. The system's job isn't to fix a deficit. It's to create an environment where that pre-existing genius can flourish.
And she starts this model at early childhood, right around ages 4 to 5. But she refuses to call them preschoolers.
Yeah, I loved that part.
She calls them natural scientists, mathematicians, engineers, and problem solvers.
Because at 4 years old, curiosity is the primary engine of learning. Kids are constantly testing hypotheses. They drop a cup to see if it falls. They're doing inquiry, pattern recognition, and observation.
But usually when a 4-year-old acts like a scientist by making a mess, the traditional system tells them to sit down and be quiet.
Exactly.
Dr. Nweze's models suggest the exact opposite. We should lean into how they actually process the world, specifically through her theme 3, which is visual and auditory strategy.
Right.
The document points out that Black children often demonstrate incredibly strong rhythmic intelligence and a deep connection to oral tradition. We're talking about spoken word, poetry, cultural storytelling.
And we really need to look at the mechanism of why this works, because this isn't just about making learning fun.
Yeah, it's actual pedagogy.
Right. Dr. Nweze argues that music and poetry actively improve things like reading fluency and analytical thinking.
Wait, really? How does that actually work in the brain? How does a spoken word poem translate to a higher reading score?
It comes down to phonemic awareness and pattern recognition. When a child learns through a highly rhythmic spoken word poem, they aren't just memorizing words.
Okay.
The rhythm creates predictable auditory patterns that help the brain map out syllables and sounds. That auditory mapping directly translates to stronger decoding skills when they look at words on a page. The rhythm is the vehicle for the literacy.
Oh, wow. That makes total sense. You are using the brain's natural affinity for a beat to sneak in complex vocabulary and syntax. But the part of her model that I think really challenges the traditional classroom is theme 4, how she views physical movement. The core motto here is, movement is intelligence.
We really need to sit with this idea because it is a profound reframe. Think about the modern classroom. You have a kid drumming their fingers on their desk or constantly shifting in their seat or tapping a pencil.
So what does this all mean for the classroom? In a traditional setting, when a kid is drumming on their desk or constantly moving, the standard system sees a distraction. That kid is immediately flagged as a behavioral problem.
Yes, exactly.
They are a distraction to the rest of the cornfield.
Right.
And frankly, this is exactly the kind of behavior that leads to modern ADHD diagnoses. The system pathologizes the movement.
Exactly. But under theme 4 of this holistic model, that fidgeting isn't a lack of focus. It is kinesthetic data processing.
Kinesthetic data processing. I love that.
Right. Movement literally activates their memory and engagement. For many learners, sitting perfectly still shuts down their cognitive engine. They need to physically interact with their environment to process complex data.
So if you view movement as a deficit, you punish the drumming.
Right.
But if you view it as an asset, you incorporate rhythmic, hands-on learning into the lesson plan.
Yeah.
You let them stand up.
Yeah.
You have them build, touch, and physically act out the concepts.
And Dr. Nweze takes this concept of kinesthetic intelligence even further by applying it to sports and games, which is theme 7, analysis and predictive thinking.
Oh, right.
Traditionally, schools treat sports as just an extracurricular activity, a way to burn off energy so the kids will sit quietly during math class.
Yeah, recess.
But she argues that sports are actually academic laboratories.
I love that phrase because when you think about it, what is a student doing when they are obsessed with a sport? They aren't just running around. They are analyzing statistics. They are interpreting team strategies.
They are looking at cause and effect and making rapid predictive decisions in real time. They are calculating probabilities and doing complex data interpretation. If you harness that natural inclination and bring it into the academic sphere, you are directly strengthening their math and scientific reasoning skills. You aren't fighting their natural interests. You are using them as the vehicle for high-level critical thinking.
It completely flips the script. But to tie all these diverse learning methods together, the movement, the oral tradition, the sports analytics, it feels like the student has to actually be an active participant in their own journey.
Yeah, they can't just be passive receivers.
Right, they can't just be a passive recipient of this new model.
Which is why the focus shifts to Theme 9, which is to ask students about their choices. It's part of what she calls the complete connection model, where all these themes act as an ecosystem.
It sounds basic, but in a state-run system, asking students what they want rarely happens. Asking them what careers they actually want, what books they find interesting, how their brain learns best.
We hear buzzwords like student engagement all the time in modern education. But the text argues that true engagement is basically impossible without ownership.
We often talk about engagement in education, but this text argues engagement is impossible without ownership. It's like trying to teach someone how to drive a car while permanently keeping them locked in the passenger seat.
That's a perfect analogy.
You can engage them by pointing out the window and explaining how the pedals work, but until you let them hold the steering wheel and choose the destination, they aren't really driving. They are just along for the ride.
I completely agree. You cannot cultivate genius in captivity. Giving students ownership transforms them from passive learners to active participants. Their motivation skyrockets.
Right.
And importantly, this circles right back around to the family reinforcement, which is theme 8 that we mentioned in the earlier socialization stages.
Right. The family ecosystem from Mcwilson's framework.
Yes. Dr. Nwze's final principle highlights this. When students are seen as intelligent from the start, taught through multiple pathways that respect their visual and kinesthetic strengths, supported by their family, and given ownership, well, their natural genius inevitably emerges. Education just moved from survival to genius development.
It is such an incredible journey we've unpacked today. We started before birth, looking at the intergenerational pre-womb coding of cultural values like Maat and Tahotep. We mapped the family ecosystem where emotional regulation and economic resilience are first taught. We navigated the friction between that organic cultural socialization and the standardized monoculture of state schooling.
Yeah.
And finally, we explored a holistic model that treats movement, sports, and storytelling, not as distractions, but as top-tier intellectual development.
And this brings it all back to you listening to this right now. Whether you are a parent raising the next generation, a lifelong learner, or just someone trying to understand your own educational history, these sources challenge you to ask a really important question.
What's that?
Are you currently operating in an environment of deficit thinking or genius development? Are you leveraging your own visual, auditory, and kinesthetic strengths, or are you ignoring them just to fit into a standardized mold?
Which leaves us with one final kind of provocative thought to mull over. If movement is intelligence and creativity is intellectual development for children, what does that mean for our adult lives?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Imagine how different the modern corporate workplace would look if we applied Dr. Nwuzi's model to our jobs. Think about it. We generally accept that sitting totally still at a desk for 8 hours straight is the definition of professionalism.
Right.
But what if that is actually an unnatural suppression of our actual genius? What if pacing the room, fidgeting, and debating ideas out loud were recognized as vital kinesthetic data processing?
I love that.
Think about that the next time you're stuck in a rigid, deeply uncomfortable corporate meeting. Maybe you aren't losing focus. Maybe your operating system is just trying to learn the way it was pre-coded to learn long before you were ever even conceived.